Hello and welcome to Rebel Unicorn Crafts. I'm Lacey, the Chief Teaching Unicorn. I teach classes locally in Northern Colorado, as well as I record them here so that my students can get a little more information, and others who are seeking more information on their creative process can also use these as resources. And today we're going to be diving deeper into fluid painting. We've already explored what happens when you use silicone versus not use silicone. We've tested a few different brands of paint and tested them head to head, and now we're diving in even deeper. The first thing I want to test is paint density. This is one of the biggest questions I have. Well, I personally have. It's one of the biggest questions I get asked, but at what density do I need my paint for it to flow? And then how do I kind of hack the densities so one bubbles up through the other? So we're actually going to be using our handy dandy kitchen scale in order to measure our paint versus our water ratios so that we know exactly how much more watery we get things. I do only thin with water because I think especially for testing certain techniques, Floetrol is too expensive. So we're going to be doing all of our tests with water. We're going to do 3 tests. We're going to mix up a baseline of a black and a white because I just want to test just with black and white. And we're going to first I'll mix it up to whatever, a big batch of what density I would normally paint with for both of those. And I'll record the percentages. And then what we'll do is, in one instance, because I have noticed that different colors, even within the same brand, we're only going to be using Craftsmart paint today, just to have a baseline of using the same brand across the board. But I have noticed that different colors sometimes act differently. So we're going to do the one test where both are a similar density, as I would normally pour. Then we'll do one where I further thin the black and I leave the white denser, and then we'll switch that and we'll further thin the white and leave the black denser. And we'll actually test on each one of those where we've got maybe 2 dirty cups and the white is on the top versus the black is on the top of the cups, and we'll see what happens there. Okay, so I'm really excited to finally figure out paint densities, have a good answer for this, as well as be able to, in my own creations, pick which colors are going to come up most predominantly. My hypothesis is that if we put obviously a denser one on top of a more liquid one, is going to fall into it. But let's just see what happens. I don't actually know because I've been doing this just kind of on a whim. Okay, so in the time that it took me to get things set up, I realized that my plan to make the 2 baseline thinned paints was flawed, and that I actually wanted to mix each one of these up separately because I want to push the thin and the thick on the other sides of the spectrum a little bit more. So we're going to start with our medium 2, the ones that I kind of would normally make my paint thinness. And I test partially when I'm testing my thickness by swirling it around, drizzling it, but the biggest test that I use is getting a scrap of something, a piece of paper, and actually seeing how well it flows, because I don't want it to be too watery and I don't want it to be too thick. So I want it to move easily but not super fluid, and this is something that I'd like to get better at explaining, but you're gonna have to have a little bit more feel for this. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna mix all these up, and I will let you know what my baseline hydration levels are now. I tried to keep my hydration levels the same across the board as best I could. So for the medium hydration, both were hydrated at 20%. For the thin hydration, I did vary a bit. The white was thinned to 27% and the black was thinned to 32%, and that was a combination of, I think, the paint being slightly different as well as just some human error. but the thick I did keep the same at 8% hydration on both. So, I'm excited to find out how this changes things. The middle canvas I'm using will have the same hydration levels, so 2 mediums. The one on the left, I am going to be doing a thick black with a thin white, and the one on the right, I will be doing a thick white with a thin black. Now for preparation, just to put the correct cups with the correct hydration levels next to each canvas so that I don't mess this up after all of that prep work. I've placed 2 cups on each of the canvases because I'm going to test the different inversions of the paint. So in the top right hand one of each cup, I'm going to put the black first, so that is the thick black. The medium hydration black, and the thin black. Then I'm going to go in with the white, so this is the thin white on top of the thick black, and then the thin white will go in the bottom cup there. And I'm just kind of making sure I've got similar amounts of paint in each cup to begin with. I had more of that thick black to begin with. But we'll continue on with the white, so the same hydration of white into the black as well as the bottom layer. And now the thick white onto the thin black, and the thick white as the bottom layer. And finally, one last bit of black, so this is a thin white onto the thick, or the thick black onto the thin white, the medium black onto the medium white, and the thick black onto the, or thin black onto the thick white. This is a bit of a tongue twister for me. I'm going to go ahead and flip all of those bottom cups first, then the top cups. And now for my favorite part, bloop, bloop, bloop. Well, that wasn't a very satisfying bloop. Okay, so right away I'm noticing something interesting. I thought the thin white was going to disappear. That painting is mainly white, which is the one that we put the black first. So that tells us, one, that whatever you put in first is going to come out last, so it'll be on top of your painting, ideally. I don't know if that also has to do with the fact that it was very thick, so it stayed on the bottom. But overall, I'm really surprised at how much white is showing up in this painting because it was so much thinner than the black, and I really thought that that thick black was going to kind of overpower it. See, there's the area where there's almost no white, and so that would have been the white went in after the black. And now for the same hydration levels. I'm getting a lot more black than I am white. And that might not be super surprising. I mean, black is a more powerful pigment than white in general. But let's see if I thin this out, if more of that white does show up. Since I used similar amounts of both white and black in this painting, there should ideally be equal amounts, but black is a much darker color and I still only get a few ribbons of white, so that's really interesting. And on to our last experiment that had the thin black with the thick white. Again, I would have thought the inverse, that the thicker color would have been the more prominent color, but on this one, it's almost completely black. So I think the real lesson here is that the thinnest color you have is going to be the most prominent. It's not necessarily going to kind of bubble up in cells, but it is going to create, I think, like a surface layer of that thin paint that can sit on top of the thicker paint. So whatever you want to be your primary color in your fluid painting, I'm thinking is your thinnest color. Which does make sense since it can sit on top, but yet somehow I'm surprised by it. You'd think that the thicker the paint in the same quantity as a thin paint would overpower a thin paint, but that's seeming to be the opposite. Even as I tilt this one more and more, I'm still not getting very much white at all, and I used a ton of white in this painting. I'll let these dry for a little bit and we'll revisit them to see if there are any differences in the drying. So far, what are your thoughts? Was this what you expected? Am I crazy for being surprised by this? They aren't completely dry, but they have waited long enough to where I don't think they're going to be moving anymore. And I know this isn't the most exciting color palette. I really wanted to make sure we focused just on the thickness, so I kept it as simple as I could. And I do have to say I am really loving the marble looks of these. They really do look like something you might see on a very fancy kitchen counter. And here they are dry. I did get some cracking on the one with the thin white, and you know, that actually doesn't surprise me too much. I do notice on paintings that I use a lot of white, I get more cracking, and I can't entirely explain that. It does seem to be, you know, mainly associated with the white one, so that formula must be a little bit different. Okay, now that you know this, is it going to change how you pour? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know if it'll change how I pour. That's a lot of thought to put into making something exactly how it is, and I really like the freedom of the pour. Thank you so much for watching. If you like more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel. If you are local to Northern Colorado, you can visit my website, rebelunicorncrafts.com, to take a class. Or if you'd just like to see some fun pictures, you can follow me on Instagram @RebelUnicornCrafts. Have a wonderful day and go get creative.